So I want to thank Wide Days for inviting us to do 15 minutes of knowledge about Music Venue Trust, because this is one of the first places that we ever talked about the project. And that was back in 2014 when MVT was created. As it says on the screen, we were created as a charity to protect, secure and improve grassroots music venues across the UK. This was because it followed a period of rapid decline with venues closing all around the country. The people who ran those venues knew that something needed to be done, but no clear agent for doing that actually came forward, and eventually it was people who ran venues themselves that sort of clustered with other colleagues. And Mark David, our CEO and founder, has co-owned and did co-run Tunbridge Wells Forum for many years, and he and Jason, his business partner, became very concerned that some of the pressures on other venues would be rested on them, and a champion was needed to talk about the sector being able to sustain. So the launch was always to the aim of securing the future of grassroots music venues. At no point did we ever want to take over, homogenize, or do anything that would make our wonderful grassroots music venues more like each other in character or program. Still to this day, MVT does not run grassroots music venues. We don't get to tell them what to do. What we get to do is to advise them, to share examples of good practice, to offer a huge amount of support. We've had people saying, well, you know, you're going to take the character away if you form like some sort of union or group. That was never our intention and never has been our action. We originally knew something that is even more pertinent now, which is that the ownership of the venues was a massive issue. The fact that huge proportions of grassroots music venues operate in commercially rented properties has always been a problem because it makes them subject to market forces. And in recent years, the pressures of anyone who rents anything have brought this very much to the fore. You know, if you live or operate any sort of business or enterprise in a commercial rented property, your rent can go up overnight, whether your business model or your personal finances can support that or not. So right at the beginning, we knew that one of the things that we wanted to tackle was this. However, when we started work on it, we realized pretty quickly that this wasn't the only issue that we would need to tackle, and it was also going to be something that would be a longer term goal than the original 5 years that we set ourselves. But it's good to be ambitious when you start an organization and start a project. So that's what we did. We started with an ambitious intention to remove venues from the normal rental property and change that model. I'll come back to that a little bit later. One of the things we quickly got involved in, which is still something that we have to deal with, is agent of change. People may or may not know the term, but they certainly know what it means, be it in relation to a music venue or be it that lovely person who moves to a village in the countryside and says that the sheep are too loud or the church bells need to be turned off. There is a peculiar bit of British law from the late 1700s, which still gives you the right to certain rights around where you live, and one of them is, you know, peace and quiet in your own home. Now, obviously, that law was written at the point that there were far fewer people in Great Britain, and it was more doable to have that right. The law is one thing, what's logical and right is another thing, but agent of change is something that attempts to sort of bridge that, and the agent of change principle is the person bringing a change has the responsibility for mitigating the impact of that change. Therefore, if somebody moves next to a music venue, they shouldn't have the right to tell that music venue they can no longer play loud music. It is a thorny thing, but we knew it was important, so right back in the beginning, we started with a petition about agent of change, bringing the concept of it into greater public knowledge. Lovely Frank Turner, who has been one of our most active artist patrons all the way through, fronted the campaign, and 32,000 people signed it. So, you know, we were off to a good start in terms of public perception. The other thing that we did, big change probably about Music Venue Trust as the person who's run the organisation since the beginning. Not much of what we did in the beginning was actually aimed at the public. Mostly it was aimed at the music industry, at governments, at local authorities. So Venues Day, which is our national networking event, the first one of those was held in December 2014. We invited venue operators from across the UK to join us in London, and we asked them the simple question, do you need help? And if so, would you like it to be us? Now, fortunately, enough of them said yes to both, and Music Venue Trust went from there. So we very quickly formed the Music Venues Alliance, with a logo we no longer use because it was a bit frilly and fussy, but it was nice at the time. The tree was quite an important growth thing, that concept of being together and, you know, grassroots and growth, the things that we've come back to. But by February 2015, we already had over 80 venues in the MVA. And over the years, it grew. I think at the biggest point, we had 960 venues in it. I think you probably all know the reasons why there are now fewer members of the MVA than there were. But again, we'll come back to that. So, what is a grassroots music venue? I think a lot of people now know what a grassroots music venue is, but believe it or not, when we started out, we weren't even using the term, we were calling them small venues. And nobody had formally designed what a grassroots music venue was. The circuit was known as the toilet circuit, and we very quickly realized that going and talking to governments about the need for support for the toilet circuit was not going to be very convincing. So one of the things that we did very early on is say, okay, what is it we're talking about? What do we want to call them? And then once you know what you want to call something, you have to define it. So working with the Mayor of London's team on the rescue plan, which very bizarrely was precipitated when Boris Johnson was London Mayor, but I'm going to credit his team rather than him with it. But one of the things we did is write for the first time what we thought a grassroots music venue was. And it starts with the relevant test. If you go to a town or a city or a village and say, is there a music venue, the place that people tell you is a music venue is most likely to be a music venue. There are other defining factors as well. I mean, we have a definition for a grassroots music venue, pub, which is a place whose main business is selling booze and food, but sometimes puts music on, whereas arguably a grassroots music venue, the main business is music. Even if they're not putting the frequency of music on that they want, they define themselves as a place where live music happens, and the alcohol selling and the other activity is ancillary to that intent. Very necessary ancillary activity, but at the same time, they don't care about their burgers and their beer more than they care about their music. If they're a grassroots music venue, they are motivated by the presentation of live music, connecting musicians with audiences. So, definitions exist, they're all on the MVT website. Grassroots music venue, grassroots music and arts space. In smaller communities, it's quite often a multi-art space or an arts centre, but if music is an important part of its programme, it can also join the Music Venues Alliance and be a GMAS. And if it's a pub with aspirations for music to be part of its identity, it can be a GMP. We're nerds, so we got very excited when grassroots music venue was first mentioned in Parliament, and Clara, who was in our team for many years, was officially our hands nerd and used to tell us every time grassroots music venues was mentioned in Parliament for a while. Now I'm glad to say it's so frequent we don't even track it anymore. We produced the first piece of research purely about grassroots music venues, which, as you can see, was called Understanding Small Music Venues, because we did it before we defined a grassroots music venue. We're quite sad that we don't actually have more academic research produced by us. This one is an interesting period piece, I would say. Quite a lot has moved on, but that one is still available. I think most of the academic research since has been other people taking from our ongoing work, but we haven't produced anything ourselves. One thing we are tremendously proud of, and does still exist and is much needed, is our emergency response service. This was launched in 2016, and this was is the service created that any music venue in trouble can contact us and come to us immediately for support. Not only do we have a wonderful team of coordinators and venue support team manager, Sophie here, who's got a phone in front of her face, who lead up this work. We also work with gurus who are industry experts on planning, acoustics, legal issues, financial issues, etc. And that help is available free of charge to grassroots music venues across the country. I'm sure you've all read about the reasons for closure. Here is a graphic that sums up the most recent ones. Prior to the last couple of years, a lot of the time it was planning, someone moving into the area, noise abatement orders. These days it's mostly financial, but that will surprise absolutely no one. Agent of change progressed. Because it is a legal and policy issue, it has been different in each country. I'm very happy to be in Scotland and say this is the only country in which it's the law. You actually cannot move next to a grassroots music venue in Scotland and shut it down because you complain. In the other countries, agent of change is what you should do. In Scotland, it's what you must do. So Scotland leads on that. There's a lot of talk at the moment about the levy. We actually introduced this concept in 2018 and started working on the idea that grassroots music venues are the research and development hub of the music industry, and they need reinvestment from the more successful bits of the industry to sustain them. It's still a work in progress. There is quite a lot of talk in the media about it. There are some very positive things happening that I will update you shortly. If anyone is brave enough to open a grassroots music venue, we produced books telling you how to do that, how to open and how to run a venue. I have to say, she's left now, but Yannicka took the photos in the books, and we're delighted that we have a lot of venues across the UK profiled in those books. Digital versions are available online now, and we still meet people who say that they opened a venue with the support of these books. Ownership, we came back to in 2020 when we launched the Own Our Venues campaign. Sorry, I got the wrong one. Save Our Venues. The pandemic happened. It was awful. People were very generous. We raised a lot of money, and the venues that thought they would close didn't. We also worked with international colleagues on Reopen Every Venue Safely campaign so that venues could open with the correct mitigations in place, start their businesses, get artists back working, get crews back working, which was tremendously important. We helped venues get public funding for the first time in Scotland. We formed a great partnership with Creative Scotland and managed to get the government support out to most grassroots music venues. There were a couple that fell through the cracks. We also used brand partnerships specifically with the National Lottery to get artists back out on the road and ensure that there were things for people to go see. Then we got to Own Our Venues, which is back to the ownership thing, launched with a £3.5 million fundraising goal. We didn't manage that, but we did raise £2.5 million and set up a partner organisation, Music Venue Properties, which bought the first venue in Atherton in October last year. There is really good news about 3 more venues coming soon, and it's a slow start, but we're hoping this will build, and over time Music Venue Properties will be like the National Trust for music venues, which is what we wanted right at the beginning. Some things just take a little longer to get there. One of the things that we did realise, and anyone who works in anything in which advocacy is an important part of what they do will realise data is really important. We now make these are our annual reports. We are very proud of them because they have lots of great data in them. We run an annual survey with Music Venues Alliance members, and from that we can extrapolate the patterns of activity and the data across the nations. This year we also had data specific to Scotland and Wales, which was really helpful when we launched our annual report in the parliaments in those nations as well as in Westminster. Oh my goodness, that time has gone so much faster than I thought it would. I'm sorry, I'm not going to have much time for questions. What I would say is Music Venue Trust obviously is still going. It's providing ongoing support, the Emergency Response Service, our own fund, the Pipeline Investment Fund. We are campaigning and advocating for so much more support because grassroots music venues are about artists at the end of the day. So everything we do is actually about artist development, local communities. Grassroots music venues are the hubs for that, and that's why we think they're really important. I and Sophie and Oliver, will be here briefly, who's our Scottish coordinator, will be around the rest of the day. Please come and ask us anything you want, or look on musicvenuetrust.com for ongoing campaigns and projects. Thank you for your attention. I can't believe how fast it went.